Hello, I'm Seed. I've put out a lot of maps for Beat Saber that involve some pretty complex rhythms and tempos, so somewhat often I'll get questions that involve things related to timing, BPMs, rhythms, or whatever. This tutorial just aims to answer some of the questions that people might have regarding those things. So for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to use a couple specific terms throughout the tutorial, so I'm just going to go ahead and explain what each term means. The beat is the pulse of the song. It's the sound that you tap your foot or nod your head to when you're listening to the music. The BPM is the amount of beats per minute of the song. The note highway is the field in any mapping software where notes can be placed. In Mediocre Mapper, it's just this long highway in the center. Measures are the number that fall beside the note highway, and they just indicate where each beat falls. So it's the number right here. The timing grid are the lines used to dissect the rhythm of a song, and in mapping, those are the beat lines between each measure of the note highway. The waveform is the graph beside the note highway, and it's just used to visually depict the music. If I use any other terms that you need clarity on, just don't be afraid to leave a comment and ask. Okay, so the first step that I usually like to follow is I find the most consistent instrument in the song, or at least the most consistent instrument at the intro of the song, so that I know what I'm going to be tapping the beat out to. And in this case, it sounds like that's going to be the guitar. So I'm just going to pull up this website called all8.com, and I'm gonna play the music, and I'm just gonna listen for the beat and tap to the beat. So it's about like 129, 130-ish. I have it set to 130 for simplicity's sake. It's less important to us what we set it to, and more important just for the players to understand sort of what BPM they're going to be swinging throughout the map. So yeah, you're just gonna set that BPM as the map's BPM in the metadata, and then you're just gonna enter the map. Scroll to the first beat that we can see on the waveform, and we're gonna place a BPM change. In ChroMapper, there's this option in the BPM changes that you have to tick to reset the BPM. Just make sure that you tick that. Otherwise, I mean, there's a plethora of things that you can do without it, but for our sake, we're just going to tick it to make it easier. You're going to set the BPM that we just found. So I just found 129. I know it's 130, but I just tapped out 129. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to set 129. And we're going to look at the waveform and make sure that the sounds line up with the measures in MMA. And so it looks like it stays on time for about 2 measures-ish before we can see the waveform starts to fall behind the measures. And it just keeps falling further and further behind. So to compensate for that, we're going to have to extend the highway to be longer. And we can do that by slowing down the BPM that we set on the change here. I'm just going to arbitrarily slow it down to about 125 BPM. And we can see how long the waveform lines up. Looks like that's a little bit too slow because you can see that the waveform starts to fall ahead of our measures that we have set. And we can either fix that by increasing this BPM a little bit, or we can fix it by adding another change and just compensating using that change. So I'm just going to add another one right here. And I'll raise it by about 2 BPM. And we can see that by this point, the waveform has fallen completely ahead of the measure. So we know that the BPM sped up there. So we're going to scroll to the point where it was last in line with the BPM that we set, which is, I would say about here. It probably started speeding up a little bit. And then we're going to set a new BPM change. And I'm going to speed it up by, yeah, we'll just leave it at 130. That's probably fine. It looks like it needs to be a little bit slower since the since the waveform started to fall behind a little bit. So we're just going to slow this down a little bit. I'll slow it to 128. And it looks like here was probably the last moment where it was on time with our BPM. So I'm going to set a new change. And it did look like it sped up just slightly because it starts to fall ahead. So we're gonna add a new change and make sure that this BPM is higher than the last one that we set. And since the last one we set is 128, this one's gonna be 130. And again, that's just an arbitrary guess. I have no idea what the actual BPM is. That's just my assumption. Looks like, for the most part, that's staying pretty on tempo. It does fall, it falls way ahead here, which means that the drummer, or I guess the band, sped up. So I'm just going to add another BPM change here, and we're going to speed it up by about, I'll add 3 BPM to it. And that lines up way better. I'm going to speed it up just a little bit more. See if we can get it like right on the line. Yeah, okay, that's perfect. And then it slows back down to what they were playing before. So it's probably about 130. Looks like we need to go a little bit slower. Try 128. A little bit faster than that. Okay, looks like this was the last beat that they were playing in time with that BPM. And it looks like the drummer speeds up a lot here. So I'm going to add... We'll add 4 BPM, set it to 132. That's almost correct. It does slow down. I'm sorry, the drummer does slow down relative to 132 BPM before the fill starts. So I'm actually going to, instead of fixing this by speeding it up even further, which would make this this slowing even more exaggerated, I'm going to make this BPM a little bit more accurate by setting it to 130. So that we can get the start of the fill in time with that BPM. Add a new BPM change. And then we're going to make sure that this change, at the very least, lines up with the end of the fill right there. And since it's ahead, we're going to speed up our BPM a little bit. I'll try 135. It's still a little bit ahead, but that's a lot closer, so we know we're going the right direction. Try 137. And that's just about perfect. And it slows down again, so we're going to add a new change right here. It looks like it was on time for a while, and then it started looks like the song starts to speed up just a little bit. So I'm going to add a change right here and just speed it up by 2 BPM. It was about right for a second and then it started to slow down again. Try 131. And generally, when you're doing this, the more changes the better, or the more changes the more accurate, I should say. But say you want to map like a vibro map or a speed map and you want the BPM to be consistent, you can technically simplify the BPM by just tweaking out the BPM like as much as possible, like as much as you possibly can over a long section if you want it to be as generalized as possible. So I guess I'll go ahead and show how I could do that. Let's say for the next like 20 seconds, for example, we wanted a vibro hold. So we'll go to 112. Okay, so we're gonna say that we want the hold to end like here. So go back to the last change. All right, and then I am going to pull all 8 up on a separate window, just so I can watch this clock at the same time. One sec, let me make sure I'm tapping it correctly. I'll watch the waveform as well. That should make it a little bit easier. Okay, so I tapped out just that section to try to average the BPM for that section just as quickly as possible. And came up with 131.22. So I'm just going to copy that, throw it into this BPM change, that number exactly. And it should somewhat stay pretty close to the beat line. We can see it sways a little bit here and there. So this is by no means an accurate way to do BPM changes. But if you're doing a hold, you don't want a BPM that sways around all the time. You know, if you're mapping vibro, you want something that the player can sort of just like drone out to. Looks like we could probably slow it down just a tad more. I'll try just 131. And if we scroll back ahead to, yeah, that's a little bit better. But yeah, not an accurate way to do BPMs at all. So essentially the fewer BPM changes that you have in your map, the less accurate that the tempo is going to be. However, it'll also be a lot more consistent, which usually for the player is better. Unless you're mapping tech, then it doesn't really matter very much. So yeah, I would say that's probably all you need to know. If you just keep following this habit that I demonstrated earlier, you know, just placing BPM changes wherever it starts drifting off. If you follow that all the way to the end of the song, you should be, you know, perfect. Should be good to go. So yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know.